The sound of my father's voice still echoes in my mind, even though it's been 3 years since that night. I can still see his finger pointing directly at me across our family's mahogany dining table, the one my grandmother had passed down to us. The same table where we'd celebrated birthdays, holidays, and graduations. The same table where my world would completely shatter. It was a cold November evening in suburban Chicago. The wind was howling outside our 2-story colonial home, rattling the windows as fallen leaves danced across the front yard. My mother had prepared one of her famous pot roasts, filling the house with the warm aroma of herbs and slow-cooked beef. It should have been a perfect family dinner. I was 24 then, fresh out of college with a degree in graphic design, but struggling to find my footing in the real world. While my older brother Marcus had landed a prestigious job at a law firm straight after graduation, I was working part-time at a local coffee shop, trying to build a freelance portfolio on the side. I lived in the basement of our family home, a temporary arrangement that had stretched longer than anyone expected. "So, Jake," my father began, cutting into his meat with more force than necessary. "Mrs. Henderson asked me today how my boys were doing. I told her about Marcus's promotion to senior associate." His voice carried that familiar tone of pride, reserved exclusively for my brother. "Then she asked about you." I felt my stomach tighten. My father, Robert Harrison, was a successful insurance broker who'd built his reputation on being straightforward and direct. At 52, he commanded respect in our community, serving on the city council and coaching Little League on weekends. He was the kind of man who believed in hard work, traditional values, and measuring success by the size of your paycheck. "I told her you were figuring things out," he continued, his gray eyes fixed on me with that look of disappointment I'd grown accustomed to. "But honestly, Jake, I'm tired of making excuses for you." My mother, Sarah, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She was a high school English teacher, gentle and nurturing, always trying to keep the peace. "Robert, maybe we could discuss this later." "No, Sarah, he needs to hear this." My father set down his fork and looked directly at me. "Your brother is 26 and already owns his own apartment downtown. He's dating a doctor, for crying out loud. He's making something of himself." I stared down at my plate, watching the gravy congeal around my mashed potatoes. This wasn't the first time I'd been compared to Marcus, but something about tonight felt different. There was an edge to my father's voice, a finality that made my chest tighten. "I'm working on building my design business, Dad. These things take time." "Time?" He laughed bitterly. "Jake, you've been working on it for 2 years. You make lattes for a living. You live in my basement. You drive my old car because you can't afford your own." The words hit me like physical blows. Each one was true, which made them hurt even more. I glanced at my mother, hoping for support, but she was staring at her hands folded in her lap. "I'm 24, Dad. I'm still young. I'm figuring out what I want to do with my life." "At 24, I was married to your mother and had just bought our first house," he shot back. "I was a man with responsibilities. You're still playing video games in my basement like you're 16. The familiar heat of embarrassment crept up my neck. Yes, I played video games. Yes, I lived in the basement, but I was also working 60-hour weeks between the coffee shop and my design projects, trying to save money, trying to build something." "Robert, please," my mother started again. "No, Sarah, I'm done tiptoeing around this." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. The sound made me flinch. "I've been patient. I've been supportive, but I'm tired of watching you waste your potential." I felt something snap inside me. "Waste my potential? Dad, I'm trying." "Trying?" His voice rose and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Pure disgust. "Jake, look at yourself. Really look at yourself. You're a grown man living like a teenager. You have no ambition, no drive, no direction. He paused, and for a moment I thought he might stop, but then he raised his hand and pointed directly at me, his finger like an accusation. "You're the shame of this family." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. My mother gasped audibly. Even Marcus, who had been quietly eating, stopped mid-chew and stared at our father in shock. "Robert," my mother whispered, her voice horrified. but the damage was done. Those 6 words, "You're the shame of this family," hit me with the force of a sledgehammer. I felt my face burn with humiliation, my hands trembling as I set down my fork. I looked around the table at my family. My mother's eyes were filled with tears. Marcus looked uncomfortable, probably grateful it wasn't him in the crosshairs. And my father looked satisfied, as if he'd finally said what he'd been thinking for years. "Jake, I didn't mean," he started, but I was already standing. "No, Dad, you meant every word." My voice was surprisingly steady, though my heart was racing. "You've been thinking it for years. You just finally said it out loud." I walked toward the kitchen, my legs feeling like rubber. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice, strained and desperate. "Robert, how could you say that to your own son?" "Someone had to," he replied, his voice still cold. "Maybe now he'll finally wake up." I grabbed my jacket from the coat closet near the back door. My hands were shaking as I put it on, but I was determined not to let them see me cry. Not here, not now. "Jake, where are you going?" my mother called out. I turned back one last time. They were all staring at me from the dining room doorway, my mother with tears streaming down her face, Marcus looking guilty and uncomfortable, and my father with his arms crossed, still defiant. "I'm going to prove him wrong," I said quietly. "And when I do, I'll never set foot in this house again." I walked out the back door into the frigid Chicago night. The wind cut through my jacket like ice, but I barely felt it. All I could feel was the burning shame of my father's words and the crushing weight of my own perceived failures. I started walking with no destination in mind, just needing to move, to get away from that house and those words. The suburban streets were quiet, except for the occasional car passing by, their headlights briefly illuminating my path before disappearing into the darkness. As I walked, I thought about my life. Was my father right? Was I really the shame of the family? I thought about Marcus with his corner office and his doctor girlfriend and his downtown apartment. I thought about my father's successful business and my mother's respected teaching career. And then I thought about me, 24 years old, living in my parents' basement, making minimum wage plus tips. But as I walked through the cold night air, something else began to form in my mind. Not self-pity, but something harder. Something that felt like steel forming in my chest. My father had called me the shame of the family. Fine, maybe I was, but I didn't have to stay that way. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. I had $2,147 in my checking account. Money I'd been saving slowly, dollar by dollar from my coffee shop job and occasional design gigs. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was mine. I kept walking until I reached the 24-hour diner on Elm Street, the one where I used to go with my friends in high school. The neon sign flickered in the window, and I could see through the glass that it was nearly empty, except for a few late-night customers and a tired-looking waitress. I sat in a corner booth and ordered coffee, my hands finally steady enough to hold the cup. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair, seemed to sense I needed space and left me alone with my thoughts. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I wasn't going back to that house. I wasn't going to sleep in that basement ever again. I wasn't going to listen to my father's disappointed sighs or feel the weight of his expectations crushing down on me. I was going to leave, not just the house, Chicago entirely. I was going to start over somewhere new, somewhere I could build something without the constant reminder of what I supposedly wasn't. I spent the next 3 hours in that diner, planning. I researched cities with growing tech and design scenes, places where a young graphic designer might have a chance. I looked at rental prices, job markets, and cost of living. By sunrise, I had a plan. Austin, Texas. It was far enough from Chicago to feel like a fresh start, but close enough that I could afford to get there. The tech scene was booming, and there were opportunities for someone with my skills if I was willing to work hard. I called in sick to the coffee shop and spent the day preparing. I found a cheap studio apartment online and put down a deposit using my debit card. I booked a one-way bus ticket for the next day. I went to the bank and withdrew most of my savings in cash, keeping just enough in my account to cover the apartment deposit and first month's rent. The hardest part was going back to the house that afternoon to pack. I waited until I knew my father would be at work, but my mother was home. She was in the kitchen when I walked in, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Jake, honey, where were you? I was so worried." "I'm leaving, Mum." I said it gently but firmly. "I'm moving to Austin." She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw understanding dawn in her eyes. "When?" "Tomorrow." She sat down heavily at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd eaten breakfast every morning for 18 years. "Jake, about what your father said." "He was right, Mom. I am the shame of this family, but I don't have to stay that way." I went down to the basement and packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases and a backpack. It was depressing how little I had to show for 24 years of life. Clothes, a few books, my laptop and my camera, the tools of my trade such as they were. As I was finishing, I heard my father's car in the driveway. My mother must have called him at work. I could hear their voices upstairs, hushed but urgent. I didn't want to face him again, not yet. Maybe not ever. I wrote a note and left it on the basement desk where I'd spent so many hours playing games and working on design projects. "Dad, you were right. I am the shame of this family. But I'm going to change that. When I prove you wrong, don't expect me to come back. Some things can't be taken back once they're said." "Jake." I grabbed my bags and headed for the back door. My mother was waiting in the kitchen, tears streaming down her face. "Jake, please don't do this. We can work this out." "No, Mom." "We can't." I hugged her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her lavender perfume. "I love you, but I need to do this. Call me when you get there." "I will." I walked out that back door for the second time in 24 hours, but this time I wasn't coming back. This time I was walking towards something instead of away from it. The bus station was crowded with people heading to different destinations, different lives. I bought a coffee and a sandwich from the vending machine and found a seat near my departure gate. As I waited, I thought about what I was leaving behind and what I was walking toward. I was leaving the only life I'd ever known. I was leaving my mother, who had always believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. I was leaving my brother, who despite everything, had always been there for me. I was leaving the comfortable familiarity of home. But I was also leaving the crushing weight of disappointed expectation. I was leaving the feeling of being constantly measured against someone else's definition of success. I was leaving the shame that had been growing in my chest for years. When my bus was called, I stood up and walked toward the gate. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I had, I might have lost my nerve. As the bus pulled away from Chicago, I watched the city I'd grown up in disappear behind me. Somewhere in those streets was the house where I'd learned to ride a bike, where I'd had my first kiss, where I'd graduated from high school, but also where I'd been told I was the shame of my family. I put in my headphones and leaned back in my seat. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not the passive hope of waiting for things to get better, but the active hope of knowing I was going to make them better. 18 hours later, I would step off that bus in Austin, Texas, with 2 suitcases, a backpack, and $2,200 in cash. I would have no job, no friends, and no safety net. But I would have something more valuable than any of that. I would have the unshakable determination to prove my father wrong. This was the beginning of the rest of my life. The Austin bus station at 6:30 a.m. was nothing like I'd imagined. I'd pictured something clean and modern, maybe with a Starbucks and free Wi-Fi. Instead, I found myself standing in a dimly lit terminal that smelled like disinfectant and desperation, surrounded by people who looked like they'd been traveling for days. I hefted my 2 suitcases and backpack, feeling the weight of everything I owned pulling at my shoulders. The Texas heat hit me the moment I stepped outside, even in the early morning. It was October, but the humidity was already making my Chicago jacket feel like a wool blanket. My studio apartment wasn't ready until noon, so I had 6 hours to kill in a city where I knew absolutely no one. I found a nearby McDonald's and ordered breakfast, spreading the rental paperwork across the plastic table as I ate. The studio was in East Austin, a neighborhood I'd researched online but never actually seen. I caught the bus using directions I'd written down, watching the city wake up around me. Austin was different from Chicago, more spread out, more colorful, with an energy that felt both laid back and ambitious at the same time. Street art covered building walls, food trucks lined the sidewalks, and everywhere I looked, I saw young people who looked like they were chasing dreams. The apartment complex was a converted warehouse in what the landlord had called an up-and-coming area. And what that really meant was that it was affordable because it was still a little rough around the edges. My studio was on the third floor, 400 square feet of concrete floors and exposed brick walls. It had a Murphy bed, a kitchenette the size of a closet, and one window that looked out onto a parking lot. It was perfect. I'd never lived alone before. Not really. Even in college, I'd had roommates. But standing in that empty studio, with the afternoon sun streaming through the window and the distant sound of traffic from the street below, I felt something I'd never experienced: complete freedom. I spent the first week sleeping on an air mattress I'd bought at a nearby Target, eating ramen noodles and cereal, and trying to find work. I'd brought my laptop and my camera, and I started reaching out to every small business, startup, and design agency in Austin. I crafted personalized emails, created custom portfolio pieces, and applied to dozens of jobs. The responses were mostly silence. A few polite rejections. One interview at a marketing firm that went nowhere when they realized I didn't have a portfolio of major client work. By the end of the first week, I had 1,940 $1,620 left. By the end of the second week, it was 1,623. I started to panic. That's when I discovered the coffee shop. Ipa Coffee was a 24-hour place in a converted house near the University of Texas campus. It was the kind of place that attracted students, freelancers, and insomniacs, people who needed caffeine and Wi-Fi at all hours. I'd gone there at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, unable to sleep, desperate for a place to work on my portfolio. The barista was a guy about my age with sleeve tattoos and gauged ears, hunched over a laptop during a lull in customers. I ordered a coffee and found a corner table with a power outlet. As I worked on a logo design for a fictional company, part of my portfolio, I heard him talking to another customer about being short-staffed. "Excuse me," I said, walking up to the counter during a quiet moment. "I heard you guys might be hiring." He looked me up and down, taking in my wrinkled button-down shirt and nervous energy. "You ever work in coffee before?" "I worked at a coffee shop in Chicago for 2 years," I said, which was true. "I can make any drink you need, handle a register, and I'm available pretty much any hours." "What's your name?" "Jake Harrison." "I'm Danny. When can you start?" "Right now, if you need me." He laughed. "I like your enthusiasm. How about tomorrow morning, 6 a.m.? I got the job. Working at Epoch was different from my suburban Chicago coffee shop. The customers were eclectic. University professors grading papers at 3 a.m., musicians coming in after late-night gigs, tech workers who seemed to survive entirely on cold brew. The atmosphere was relaxed but busy, with a constant hum of conversation and the clicking of laptop keys. The pay was $12 an hour plus tips, which wasn't much, but it was something. More importantly, it gave me structure and stability while I continued building my design business. I started picking up shifts whenever I could get them, sometimes working doubles, sometimes pulling all-nighters. The other baristas were mostly artists, musicians, and writers, people who understood the hustle of trying to make it in a creative field while paying rent. During slow periods, I'd work on my laptop behind the counter, designing logos, business cards, and simple websites. A few customers noticed what I was doing and asked if I took freelance work. My first Austin client was a local band that needed a poster for their show. They paid me $75, which felt like a fortune at the time. Word started to spread. The coffee shop became my accidental office, and the customers became my network. I designed a menu for a food truck owner who came in every morning. I created business cards for a yoga instructor who held meetings there. I built a simple website for a vintage clothing boutique owner who spent her afternoons working at a corner table. None of these were big-paying jobs, usually between $50 and $200, but they were real clients with real needs. And more importantly, they were happy with my work. I called my mother every Sunday, usually from the parking lot behind my apartment building where I could get better cell reception. She'd update me on life in Chicago, my father's business, Marcus's latest achievements, neighborhood gossip. She always asked when I was coming home for a visit. "I'm not ready yet, Mom," I'd tell her. "I'm still building something here." "Your father asks about you," she'd say quietly. "What does he say?" "He wonders how you're doing, whether you're okay." I never asked her to tell him anything specific. I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. By my 3rd month in Austin, I'd developed a routine. I'd work the morning shift at IPOC from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. Then, I'd spend the afternoon working on design projects, either at the coffee shop or in my studio apartment. Evenings were for networking, going to local meetups, art shows, startup events, anywhere I might meet potential clients. The Austin tech scene was exploding. Every week, there were new startups launching, new companies moving to the city, new opportunities for someone with design skills. I started attending every event I could find, often arriving with business cards I'd printed at Kinko's and a practiced elevator pitch. "Hi, I'm Jake Harrison. I'm a graphic designer, specializing in brand identity and web design for startups and small businesses. I help companies tell their story through visual design." I must have said those words 1,000 times. Most conversations went nowhere, but occasionally, someone would hand me their card and say, "We might need some design work. Send me your portfolio." I was building something slowly but steadily. My client list was growing. My portfolio was getting stronger. My bank account was still thin, but it was stable. But I was also lonely, living alone in a new city, working odd hours, spending most of my time either behind a coffee counter or hunched over my laptop. It wasn't exactly a social lifestyle. I'd made friends with my co-workers at Epoch, but they were mostly younger, still in college, or just out of it. I missed having people my own age to talk to share experiences with. I missed my family, even though I was still too proud and too hurt to reach out beyond my weekly calls with my mother. One evening in December, I was working late at the coffee shop when a woman about my age came in. She was tall, with curly red hair and paint-stained fingers, carrying a portfolio bag that looked like it had seen better days. "Are you guys hiring?" she asked Danny, who was working the evening shift. "Sorry, we're fully staffed right now," he said. "But I can take your information in case something opens up." She looked disappointed, but pulled out a resume. I couldn't help but notice the heading, Emma Rodriguez, graphic designer. "Excuse me," I said, walking over. I couldn't help but overhear, "Are you a graphic designer?" She looked at me suspiciously. "Yeah, why?" "I'm Jake," I said, extending my hand. "I'm a designer too. I work here part-time, but I freelance on the side. There's a pretty good community of designers in Austin if you're interested in meeting people." Her expression softened. "Really? I just moved here from San Antonio. I don't know anyone. There's a design meetup next Thursday at a bar on South Lamar. You should come. I'll introduce you to some people." That's how I met Emma Rodriguez, who would become my first real friend in Austin. She was 25, had just moved to the city with her boyfriend, who had promptly dumped her for someone he'd met at his new job, and was trying to break into the design scene just like I was. We started hanging out regularly, working on projects together, sharing leads and referrals. Emma was talented, more skilled than I was in many ways, but she was also dealing with her own set of challenges. She was a first-generation college graduate, supporting not just herself, but sending money home to her family in San Antonio. "My parents think I'm crazy," she told me one night as we worked on separate projects at Epoch. "They want me to get a real job with benefits and steady pay. They don't understand why I'm trying to make it as a designer." "Sounds familiar," I said, thinking about my father's disappointed face across the dinner table. Family pressure, something like that. Emma became my sounding board, my collaborator, and eventually my business partner. We started taking on bigger projects together. Her illustration skills combined with my branding and web design experience. We could offer clients a complete package, from logo design to marketing materials to website development. Our first big break came in March, 7 months after I'd arrived in Austin. A local startup was looking for a complete brand identity package. They'd found us through a mutual contact at one of the networking events we'd been attending religiously. The project was worth $5,000, more money than I'd made from any single client before. Emma and I split it 50-50, and for the first time since leaving Chicago, I felt like I was actually making progress. The client was happy with our work. They referred us to another startup. That client referred us to another. Slowly, word was spreading that there were 2 young designers in Austin who delivered good work on time and on budget. I was still working at Epoch, but I'd cut back to part-time hours. Emma had found a part-time job at a local art supply store. We were both still hustling, still struggling to make ends meet, but we were building something. One Sunday evening, I was on the phone with my mother when she said something that caught me off guard. "Jake, your father wants to talk to you." I felt my chest tighten. "Mom, I'm not ready for that yet. He's been asking about you more and more. He knows you're doing well. He's proud of you." "He's proud of me?" I couldn't keep the skepticism out of my voice. "He saw the website you designed for that restaurant. Marcus showed him. He said it was professional, that you clearly have talent." I didn't know what to say. Part of me was angry that my father was only acknowledging my work now that it looked successful. Part of me was hungry for his approval, despite everything. "I'm not ready, Mom. Maybe someday, but not yet." "Okay, honey. But Jake," "Yeah? I'm proud of you. What you've built there, starting from nothing. It's incredible." After I hung up, I sat in my small apartment and looked around. I'd furnished it slowly over the months with pieces from thrift stores and garage sales. I had a real bed now, a small couch, a desk where I could work comfortably. It wasn't much, but it was mine. On my desk was a folder full of client contracts, invoices, and testimonials. Next to it was my laptop, where I'd built dozens of websites and designed hundreds of logos. Behind me on the wall was a corkboard covered with business cards from networking events, contact information for potential clients, and a photo Emma had taken of us at our first design meetup. I thought about where I'd been a year ago, living in my parents' basement making lattes, listening to my father's disappointed sighs. I thought about that night at the dinner table, the words that had cut so deep they'd driven me to pack my bags and leave everything behind. I wasn't there yet. I wasn't where I ultimately wanted to be, but I was somewhere. I was building something real, something that was mine. And for the first time in my life, I was proud of what I saw when I looked in the mirror. By the time summer rolled around, Emma and I had officially formed Harrison Rodriguez Design. We'd registered as an LLC, opened a business bank account, and were working out of a shared workspace in East Austin, a converted warehouse filled with startups, freelancers, and creative types. The co-working space was called The Hive, and it buzzed with the energy of people building things. There were app developers, marketing consultants, photographers, and about a dozen other small businesses, all working toward their own versions of success. For $150 a month, I got a desk, fast internet, unlimited coffee, and most importantly, the feeling that I was part of something bigger than myself. Emma and I had complementary skills that made us a formidable team. She was the creative visionary. Her illustrations were bold and eye-catching, and she had an intuitive understanding of color and composition that I envied. I was the strategic thinker, good at understanding what clients really needed, translating their vague ideas into concrete design solutions, and managing projects from start to finish. Our client base was growing steadily. We were working with local restaurants, boutique fitness studios, tech startups, and small professional services firms. The work was challenging and varied, which kept us engaged and constantly learning. One of our biggest projects came through a referral from the coffee shop. A local entrepreneur named Marcus Chen was launching a meal delivery service targeting busy professionals. He needed everything: logo, website, mobile app design, marketing materials, even the design for his delivery vehicle wraps. "This could be huge for us," Emma said, as we reviewed his brief. "If we do this right, it could be the kind of project that really puts us on the map." The project was worth $12,000, split over 3 months. It was by far our biggest contract to date, and it would allow both of us to finally quit our part-time jobs and focus on design full-time. I gave my 2 weeks' notice at Epoch on a Tuesday morning. Danny, who had become a good friend, was genuinely happy for me. "You've been working toward this since the day you started here," he said, shaking my hand. "I always knew you'd make it." "Make it?" I laughed. "I'm still figuring out what making it even means." "Trust me, you're making it. You came here with nothing, and now you're running your own business. That's something to be proud of." The meal delivery project pushed us to our limits. Marcus was a demanding client, detail-oriented, opinionated, and constantly changing his mind about what he wanted. But he was also smart, ambitious, and willing to pay for quality work. We spent weeks developing the brand identity. The company was called Nourish, and Marcus wanted something that felt both professional and approachable, sophisticated enough for downtown office workers, but friendly enough for young families. Emma created a series of illustrations that became the heart of the brand. Simple, elegant drawings of fresh ingredients that conveyed health and quality without being pretentious. I developed a color palette and typography system that felt modern but warm, and designed a logo that worked equally well on business cards and delivery truck sides. The website was the most complex project I'd ever tackled. It needed to handle customer accounts, payment processing, menu selection, delivery scheduling, and real-time order tracking. I partnered with a local web developer named Carlos, who handled the back-end programming while I focused on the user experience and visual design. We worked 60-hour weeks for 2 months straight. Emma and I would arrive at the Hive at 8 a.m. and often not leave until 10 p.m. We survived on takeout, energy drinks, and the adrenaline of working on something that felt important. The launch was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in August. Marcus had lined up a PR campaign, partnerships with local gyms and offices, and a promotional discount for first-time customers. Emma and I would be there for the launch, ready to troubleshoot any issues with the website or marketing materials. The night before the launch, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk in my apartment, staring at the Nourish website on my laptop screen. It was beautiful, clean, intuitive, and professional. The logo looked crisp and memorable. The illustrations were engaging and appetizing. It was the best work I'd ever done, but I was terrified it wouldn't work. At 6 a.m., I met Emma at the Hive. We'd set up a command center with multiple monitors, ready to monitor website traffic, social media response, and any technical issues that might arise. Marcus launched his marketing campaign at 8 a.m. sharp. Within minutes, we started seeing traffic to the website. By 10 a.m., customers were placing orders. By noon, the first delivery truck was on the road. "It's working," Emma said, staring at the analytics dashboard. "People are actually using it." By the end of the first day, Nourish had received over 200 orders. The website was performing flawlessly. The branding was getting positive mentions on social media, and Marcus was ecstatic. "You two are incredible," he said, calling us that evening. "This is exactly what I envisioned, but better. I'm going to refer you to every business owner I know." The success of the Nourish launch changed everything for us. Within a week, we had 3 new client inquiries. Within a month, we had a waiting list of potential projects. Emma and I had to start turning down work or pushing delivery dates out by weeks. "We need to hire someone," Emma said one afternoon as we reviewed our project pipeline. "We can't keep up with demand." "Are you sure we're ready for that?" I asked. "Hiring someone is a big step. Jake, look at our numbers. We're booked solid for the next 3 months. We're leaving money on the table by not taking on more work." She was right. We hired Sophia, a recent graduate from UT's design program, as our first employee. She was eager, talented, and willing to work for less than we probably should have paid her because she needed the experience. By October, we'd moved out of the Hive and into our own small office space, a converted loft in a building full of other creative businesses. We had 3 employees, a steady stream of clients, and a growing reputation in Austin's business community. I was making more money than I'd ever imagined possible. Not rich, but comfortable. More than my father had made at my age, I realized one day while reviewing our monthly financial reports. That thought led to a phone call I'd been avoiding for months. "Mom, I want to talk to Dad." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." "Hold on, let me get him." I heard muffled conversation in the background, then my father's voice, tentative and uncertain. "Jake." "Hi, Dad. How are you? Your mother tells me you're doing well." "I'm doing fine. I wanted to let you know that I'm coming home for Christmas." Another pause. That's wonderful. We'd love to see you." "I'll be flying in on December 23rd. I'll stay through the 27th. "Jake, about what I said that night. We'll talk when I get there, Dad. I'm not ready to have that conversation over the phone." "Okay, I understand. We'll see you at Christmas." After I hung up, I sat in my office and looked around. Emma was at her desk, working on illustrations for a new client. Sophia was in the corner, building a prototype for a mobile app interface. The late afternoon sun was streaming through our large windows, casting long shadows across the polished concrete floors. This was mine. We'd built this from nothing, from those desperate first weeks in Austin when I was sleeping on an air mattress and eating ramen every night. From those early morning shifts at the coffee shop, from the networking events where I'd practiced my elevator pitch until I could say it in my sleep. I thought about my father's words that night at dinner. "You're the shame of this family." For so long, those words had felt like a weight I couldn't shake. But sitting in my own office, looking at the team I'd helped build, the clients who trusted us with their businesses, the work we'd created, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't trying to prove my father wrong anymore. I was just trying to build something meaningful. 2 months later, I bought my plane ticket home. The flight from Austin to Chicago felt longer than usual, even though it was the same 2.5 hours I'd flown dozens of times for quick business trips. But this time was different. This time, I was going home to face my family, and specifically my father, for the first time since that night at the dinner table almost 2 years ago. I'd changed in those 2 years, and not just professionally. I was 30 pounds heavier from actually eating regular meals instead of surviving on coffee and energy bars. I'd started working out at a gym near our office, partly for stress relief and partly because I'd realized that sitting at a computer for 12 hours a day wasn't sustainable long term. I dressed better now, not expensive clothes, but clothes that fit properly and looked intentional. But the biggest change was internal. I walked differently, spoke with more confidence, made eye contact when I introduced myself to new people. I'd learned to advocate for myself and my work, to negotiate contracts, to manage employees. I'd become the kind of person who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with 3 new business contacts. Emma had driven me to the airport that morning. "You sure you don't want me to come with you for moral support?" she'd joked, but I could tell she was genuinely concerned. "I need to do this alone," I'd told her. "Besides, someone needs to keep Sophia from redesigning all our client work while I'm gone. Call me if you need an emergency extraction," she'd said, hugging me goodbye. "I'll come up with some business crisis that requires your immediate return." The plane touched down at O'Hare at 3:30 p.m. on December 23rd. Chicago was buried under 6 inches of fresh snow, and the familiar blast of Midwest winter air hit me as I walked through the terminal. I'd forgotten how different the cold felt here. Not just cold, but aggressive, like it was trying to get inside your bones. My mother was waiting at baggage claim, and I saw her before she saw me. She looked older, smaller somehow, with more grey in her hair than I remembered. When she spotted me, her face lit up with a smile that made my chest tight. "Jake!" She wrapped me in a hug that lasted longer than usual, and I could feel her trying not to cry. "Oh, honey, you look so good, so grown up." "Hi, Mom, you look good too." She held me at arm's length, studying my face. "You do look different, more settled, more sure of yourself." We drove through the familiar streets of my childhood, past the high school where I'd struggled through calculus, past the park where I'd learned to throw a football, past the McDonald's where I'd had my first job at 16. Everything looked smaller than I remembered, but also more precious somehow, like seeing childhood toys in an attic. "Your father's been nervous all week," my mother said as we pulled into the driveway. He's cleaned the garage twice, reorganized his office, even helped me with the Christmas decorating. Is Marcus home? He'll be here for dinner. He's bringing Rebecca. They got engaged last month. Of course they did. Marcus was still living his perfectly orchestrated life, hitting every milestone exactly when he was supposed to. Part of me felt the old familiar sting of comparison, but it was fainter now, more like the memory of pain than actual pain. The house looked exactly the same. Same beige siding, same black shutters, same wreath on the front door that my mother put up every December. But walking through the front door felt surreal, like entering a museum of my former life. My father was in the living room, pretending to read a newspaper, but clearly waiting for me to arrive. He stood up when I walked in, and we faced each other across the same room where we'd watched football games and Christmas morning gift exchanges for 18 years. He looked older too. His hair was completely gray now, and there were new lines around his eyes. But he still had that same straight-backed posture, the same way of holding himself that said he was accustomed to being in charge. "Hello, Jake. Dad?" We stood there for a moment, neither of us sure what came next. Finally, he extended his hand, and I shook it. His grip was firm, familiar. "You look good," he said. "Different. Thanks." My mother bustled around, trying to fill the awkward silence with activity. "Jake, your room is all ready. Same as always. I put fresh sheets on the bed. Are you hungry? I can make you a sandwich." "I'm fine, Mom. Thanks." The afternoon passed in careful politeness. We talked about safe topics. The weather, my flight, the Christmas decorations. My father asked generic questions about Austin, and I gave generic answers. The air felt thick with things we weren't saying. Marcus arrived at 6 p.m. with Rebecca, a petite blonde woman who worked as a pediatrician at Northwestern. She was exactly the kind of woman I'd expected Marcus to marry, smart, accomplished, from a good family. They announced their engagement over dinner, showing off a ring that probably cost more than I'd made in my first 3 months in Austin. "Congratulations," I said, and meant it. "When's the wedding?" "Next October," Rebecca said. "We're thinking somewhere in the suburbs, maybe the country club." "That sounds perfect." We were halfway through dinner when my father finally brought up my work. "Your mother showed me some of the things you've designed," he said, cutting his steak with precision. "The website for that delivery company. It looks professional." "Thank you. How's business?" "Good. We're busy." I have a business partner, Emma Rodriguez. We have 3 employees now." I could see him processing this information, trying to fit it into his understanding of who I was. 3 employees? "Yeah, we've grown pretty quickly. What kind of revenue are you doing?" The question was classic Dad, straight to the numbers, the metrics that mattered to him. I hesitated. 2 years ago, I would have been embarrassed to talk about money with him. Now, I was proud of what we'd built. "We're on track to do about $300,000 this year." He set down his fork and looked at me directly for the first time all evening. $300,000. Gross revenue, not profit. "But yeah," Marcus looked surprised. Rebecca looked impressed. My mother was beaming. That's substantial," my father said quietly. "We're just getting started. We think we can double that next year." The conversation continued, with my father asking more detailed questions about our business model, our clients, our growth plans. I found myself explaining how we'd built everything from scratch, how we'd developed our reputation, how we planned to scale. It felt good to talk about it, to share what we'd accomplished, but it also felt strange to be having this conversation with my father after all this time. Part of me was still angry about that night 2 years ago. Part of me was hungry for his approval. Part of me was proud to be proving him wrong. After dinner, Marcus and Rebecca left to visit her family, and my mother went upstairs to wrap last-minute presents. My father and I found ourselves alone in the living room, the same room where we'd watched countless Bears games, where he'd helped me with homework, where we'd had our last real conversation before everything fell apart. "Jake," he said, settling into his familiar recliner, "I owe you an apology. I'd been waiting for this moment for 2 years, but now that it was here, I didn't know what to say. What I said that night at dinner, it was wrong. It was cruel. It was..." He paused, searching for words. "It was the worst thing I've ever said to anyone, let alone my own son. I sat on the couch across from him, the same spot where I'd spent countless evenings as a kid. "Why did you say it?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I was frustrated. I was worried about you. I thought you were wasting your potential, making excuses, taking the easy path. I thought if I pushed hard enough, you'd, I don't know, snap out of it. So you decided to humiliate me." I lost my temper. I said something I'd been thinking for a while, but should never have said out loud. He looked at me with eyes that were genuinely remorseful. "I was wrong about you, Jake. I was wrong about what you needed, wrong about what you were capable of, wrong about everything." I felt something loosening in my chest, a knot I'd been carrying for 2 years. "I needed you to believe in me, Dad. Not push me, not compare me to Marcus. Just believe that I could figure things out. I know that now. I wish I'd known it then." We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, I could hear the wind rattling the windows and the distant sound of snowplows working the neighborhood streets. "I'm proud of you," he said finally. "What you've built in Austin, starting from nothing, it's remarkable. It's more than I accomplished at your age." "Thanks, Dad, that means a lot." "Are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. "Yeah, I am. I mean, it's stressful running a business, and there are days when everything goes wrong. But yeah, I'm happy. I feel like I'm building something meaningful. That's all I ever wanted for you, for both you boys. To find something that made you happy and challenged you to be your best self." I thought about the last 2 years. The long nights at the coffee shop, the networking events where I'd felt like an imposter, the client presentations where I'd had to fake confidence until it became real. It had been hard, scary, often overwhelming, but it had also been mine. "I need to tell you something," I said. "That night when you called me the shame of the family, it hurt. It hurt more than anything anyone had ever said to me, Jake, but it also saved me. It forced me to leave, to start over, to prove to myself what I was capable of. I'm not saying I'm grateful for what happened, but I'm grateful for where it led me." My father nodded slowly. "I've thought about that night every day for 2 years. If I could take it back." "You can't, but we can start from here." Christmas morning felt different than it had in years. We opened presents in the living room like we always had, but the dynamic had shifted. I wasn't the disappointing son anymore, the one who needed to be fixed or motivated. I was just another adult family member with my own life and my own successes to share. I'd brought gifts from Austin, local coffee for my mother, a bottle of Texas whiskey for my father, and a framed photo of the Austin skyline for the house. Small things, but they represented my new life, the place I'd made for myself. My father gave me a business book he'd been reading about entrepreneurship and growth strategies. "I thought you might find some useful ideas in here," he said. "Growing a business is one of the hardest things you can do." It was the first time he'd acknowledged that what I was doing was difficult, that it required skill and intelligence and perseverance. It wasn't much, but it felt like recognition. On my last day, my father asked if I wanted to go for a walk around the neighborhood. It was something we'd done occasionally when I was younger, usually when he wanted to have a serious conversation away from the house. We bundled up and headed out into the crisp December air. The streets were quiet, most of the neighbors inside enjoying their holiday break. We walked past the house where my best friend from elementary school had lived, past the corner where I'd crashed my bike learning to ride without training wheels. "I want you to know," my father said as we turned onto Maple Street, "I tell people about your business now. I'm proud to talk about what you've accomplished." "Thanks, Dad. Mrs. Henderson asked about you again last week. I told her you were running a successful design firm in Austin. I told her you were doing better than I could have imagined." I smiled, thinking about Mrs. Henderson, our busybody neighbor who'd been keeping track of everyone's children for as long as I could remember. "What did she say?" "She said she always knew you'd find your way. She said you were the kind of kid who marched to your own drummer, and that those kids usually turn out just fine if you give them time." We walked in comfortable silence for a while, past houses where I'd trick-or-treated, where I'd shoveled driveways for extra money, where I'd delivered newspapers in middle school. "Jake," my father said as we circled back toward home, "I want you to know that you're welcome here anytime. This is your home, no matter what happened before." "I know, Dad, and I'll visit more often, but Austin is my home now." "I understand. I'm glad you found a place where you belong." That evening, as I packed my bag for the flight back to Texas, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace with my family. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of genuine understanding and respect. My mother drove me to the airport the next morning, and this time saying goodbye didn't feel like I was running away from something. It felt like I was returning to a life I'd built for myself. "Take care of yourself," she said, hugging me at the departure gate. "And call more often." "I will, Mom, I promise." As the plane took off and Chicago disappeared below me, I thought about the journey I'd been on. 2 years ago, I'd left this city as a failure, carrying the shame of my father's words and the weight of my own perceived inadequacy. Now, I was returning to Austin as someone different. Not just successful, but confident. Not just accomplished, but genuinely happy with the life I'd created. The hardest part was over. I'd faced my past, made peace with my family, and proven to myself that I was capable of building something meaningful from nothing. But I also knew this was just the beginning. I had bigger dreams now, bigger goals for what Harrison Rodriguez Design could become. I had a team that believed in our vision, clients who trusted our work, and a partner who challenged me to be better every day. As we descended into Austin, I could see the city lights spreading out below me like a constellation of possibilities. This was home now. This was where I belonged, and this was where I was going to build something even bigger. Coming back to Austin after Christmas felt like coming home in a way that Chicago no longer did. The warm Texas air, the familiar skyline, the energy of a city that felt like it was always becoming something more. It all welcomed me back like an old friend. Emma picked me up from the airport, practically bouncing with excitement. "Wait until you see what happened while you were gone," she said, pulling away from the curb. "We got 3 new client inquiries, including one that could be huge." Define huge. A tech startup that just raised a Series A round. They want a complete rebrand, and they have a budget of $50,000. I stared at her. $50,000? For one project? "Jake, we're not the scrappy little design shop anymore. We're becoming a real agency. People are starting to seek us out instead of us having to hunt for every project." She was right. Over the past year, our reputation had grown to the point where about half our new business came from referrals. We'd worked with some notable Austin companies, and word was spreading that Harrison Rodriguez Design delivered quality work on time and on budget. The tech startup was called Flow State, and they were developing productivity software for remote teams. Their founder, David Kim, had sold his previous company to Google and was using that success to fund his next venture. He was exactly the kind of client we dreamed of when we started. Well-funded, ambitious, and looking for a design partner who could grow with them. "We're not just looking for someone to make us a logo," David explained during our first meeting. "We want a design team that understands technology, that can help us think through user experience, that can scale with us as we grow." The project was more complex than anything we'd tackled before. Flow State needed a complete brand identity, a web application interface, a marketing website, mobile app designs, and a full suite of marketing materials. It was the kind of project that would require us to expand our team and our capabilities. "We need to hire more people," I told Emma after David left our office. "Good people. This is our chance to level up." We hired 2 new designers, Marcus, not my brother, but a local guy with experience at tech companies, and Jenny, a UX specialist who just moved to Austin from San Francisco. We also brought on a project manager named Alex to help us handle the increasing complexity of our client work. Our team had grown from 2 people working out of a coffee shop to 7 people in a real office. I'd gone from making lattes to managing a team, from desperately searching for any design work to turning away projects that didn't fit our strategic vision. The Flow State project pushed us in new directions. Instead of just creating visual designs, we were conducting user research, building prototypes, and thinking strategically about how design could solve business problems. Jenny brought expertise in user experience that elevated all of our work, while Marcus contributed a deep understanding of how design worked in tech environments. 6 months into the project, David pulled me aside after a presentation. "I want to talk to you about something," he said. "Flow State is growing faster than we expected. We're going to need ongoing design support, not just projects, but a real partnership. Would you be interested in a retainer arrangement?" A retainer meant predictable monthly income, steady work, and the ability to plan our growth more strategically. It also meant a deeper partnership with a client, becoming part of their team rather than just a vendor. "What did you have in mind?" I asked. $30,000 a month for ongoing design support, user interface work, marketing materials, product design, whatever we need. In exchange, you'd dedicate a certain amount of your team's time exclusively to Flow State. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but inside I was doing mental calculations. $30,000 a month was $360,000 a year from a single client. It was more than our entire revenue had been just 2 years earlier. "That's interesting," I said. "Let me discuss it with Emma and get back to you." That night, Emma and I sat in our office long after everyone else had gone home, talking through the implications of David's offer. "It's a lot of money," Emma said, "but it's also a big commitment. We'd essentially be betting our growth on one client." "True, but it's also the kind of partnership that could transform our business. Steady revenue, high-profile work, the chance to really dive deep with a growing company. What if they get acquired? What if their funding dries up? What if David decides he wants to bring design in-house?" These were all valid concerns, but they were also the kinds of risks that came with growth. We could play it safe and stay small, or we could take calculated risks and see how big we could build this thing. "What does your gut tell you?" I asked. Emma was quiet for a moment, staring out the window at the Austin skyline. "My gut tells me we should do it, but with protections. A 6-month minimum commitment, 30-day termination clause, and the right to work with other clients as long as there's no conflict." We negotiated the retainer agreement over the next 2 weeks, ultimately settling on terms that felt fair to both sides. Flow State would get dedicated access to our team's expertise, and we'd get the financial stability to make bigger investments in our growth. The retainer changed everything. With predictable monthly income, we could hire more strategically, invest in better tools and equipment, and take on more ambitious projects with other clients. We moved into a larger office space, a converted warehouse with high ceilings, exposed brick walls, and enough room for our growing team. By the end of our 2nd year in business, we had 12 employees and were on track to do over $800,000 in revenue. I was no longer doing day-to-day design work. My role had evolved into business development, team management, and strategic planning. Emma remained our creative director, overseeing all design work and maintaining our creative standards. The success brought new challenges. Managing a team was different from being a team. I had to learn how to hire well, how to set clear expectations, how to give feedback that helped people grow. I had to think about company culture, about creating an environment where talented people wanted to work. I also had to learn how to say no. We were getting more project inquiries than we could handle, and I had to develop criteria for the kinds of work we wanted to take on. Not every project was worth our time, even if the client could pay our rates. "We're not just a design shop anymore," I told Emma one afternoon as we reviewed our project pipeline. "We're becoming a strategic design consultancy. Our clients aren't just buying our time, they're buying our expertise, our process, our ability to solve complex problems." The realization was both exciting and terrifying. We were building something bigger than either of us had originally envisioned, but with that growth came responsibility. We had employees who depended on us, clients who trusted us with their businesses, and a reputation that took years to build but could be damaged quickly. One of our biggest challenges was maintaining quality as we grew. When Emma and I were doing all the work ourselves, we could control every detail. Now, with a team of 12, we had to trust other people to represent our standards and our vision. We developed systems and processes, design reviews, client communication protocols, project management workflows. We created a company handbook that outlined our values, our approach to client work, and our expectations for team members. But the most important thing we did was hire carefully. We learned that technical skills could be taught, but the right attitude and work ethic couldn't. We looked for people who were naturally curious, who cared about the details, who understood that our work was about solving problems for real businesses with real challenges. As we approached our 3rd anniversary, I found myself reflecting on how far we'd come. I thought about that first night in Austin, sleeping on an air mattress in an empty studio apartment, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. I thought about those early mornings at the coffee shop, those networking events where I'd felt like I was pretending to be someone I wasn't. Now, I was invited to speak at design conferences about building a creative business. Other young designers reached out asking for advice about starting their own agencies. Local business publications wrote articles about our company as an Austin success story, but the moment that really drove home how much had changed came on a random Tuesday afternoon. I was in a meeting with a potential client, a Fortune 500 company that was considering hiring us for a major rebranding project. The CMO was asking about our experience, our process, our team's capabilities. We typically work with agencies that have at least 10 years of experience, she said. How long have you been in business? 3 years, I replied confidently, but our team has over 40 years of combined experience, and we've worked with companies ranging from startups to publicly traded corporations. The conversation continued for another hour, and by the end, she was talking about next steps and timelines. As I walked her to the elevator, she mentioned something that stuck with me. You know, I was skeptical when my colleague recommended you. I thought you might be too young, too inexperienced for a project of this scope. But listening to you talk about your process, seeing the work you've done, it's clear you know what you're doing. After she left, I sat in my office and thought about what she'd said. 3 years ago, I would have been intimidated by that kind of client, would have felt like I was in over my head. Now, I genuinely believed we could deliver exceptional work for any client, regardless of size or complexity. That confidence hadn't come overnight. It had been built through hundreds of client presentations, thousands of hours of design work, countless problems solved, and challenges overcome. It had been earned through the process of building something from nothing. That evening, I called my parents. It had become a weekly tradition since my Christmas visit. A chance to stay connected, to share what was happening in our respective lives. How's business? My father asked, as he always did. Good, really good. We just landed a project with a Fortune 500 company. It's the biggest contract we've ever signed. That's fantastic, Jake. What kind of company? As I described the project, I could hear the pride in his voice. It was the same tone he'd always used when talking about Marcus's achievements, but now it was directed at me. It felt good, but it also felt different than I'd expected. I was proud of what we'd built, but I no longer needed his approval to feel successful. I'm proud of you, son, he said at the end of the call. What you've built there, it's remarkable. Thanks, Dad. That means a lot. After I hung up, I walked around our office one more time before heading home. The space was quiet now, our team having left for the day, but I could see evidence of the work happening everywhere. Sketches on whiteboards, prototypes tacked to walls, the comfortable chaos of creative people solving problems. This was what I'd been building toward without even knowing it. Not just a business, but a place where talented people could do their best work, where we could solve interesting problems for clients who valued what we brought to the table. I thought about that dinner table conversation 3 years ago, about my father's words that had cut so deep. He'd called me the shame of the family, and maybe at that moment I was. But shame wasn't a permanent condition. It was just a starting point. The real question wasn't whether I'd proven him wrong. The real question was what I was going to build next. The Fortune 500 project, a complete rebrand for a national retail chain called Modern Home, became a turning point for our agency. not just because of the revenue, though the $180,000 contract was certainly significant, but because of what it represented. We were no longer the scrappy startup design shop. We were a legitimate creative consultancy capable of handling enterprise-level work. The project took 8 months to complete and required us to coordinate with multiple stakeholders across different regions, manage focus groups, conduct market research, and develop brand guidelines that would be implemented across 400+ retail locations. It was the most complex project we'd ever undertaken, and it tested every system and process we'd built. Emma and I split responsibilities. She led the creative development while I managed the client relationship and project logistics. Our team worked in focused sprints, developing concepts, testing them with target customers, refining based on feedback, and iterating until we had something that worked both creatively and strategically. The final presentation was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in Modern Home's corporate headquarters in Dallas. Emma, Alex, our project manager, and I flew down the night before, staying in a hotel near their offices. I barely slept, running through the presentation in my mind, anticipating questions, preparing for every possible scenario. We were presenting to their entire C-suite: CEO, CMO, VP of store operations, head of marketing, and about 6 other executives. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Dallas, a massive table that could seat 20 people, and presentation technology that cost more than our first office lease. "Good morning, everyone," I began, standing at the front of the room with a confidence that felt natural now, but had taken years to develop. 3 months ago, you asked us to help Modern Home tell a new story, one that would resonate with younger customers while honoring the brand's 40-year heritage. Today, we're here to show you how we can make that story come to life. The presentation lasted 90 minutes. We walked them through our research findings, our strategic recommendations, the new visual identity, and examples of how the brand would be applied across different touchpoints, from storefront signage to mobile app interfaces to employee uniforms. The room was quiet when we finished. The CEO, a woman in her 50s named Janet Morrison, was taking notes and studying the brand guidelines we'd printed for each attendee. "This is exceptional work," she said finally. "It feels both fresh and familiar, which is exactly what we were hoping for. You've managed to modernize our brand without losing what makes us distinctive." The CMO nodded enthusiastically. "The customer research you conducted really shows. This isn't just a pretty design, it's strategically sound. I can see how this will help us connect with the demographics we're trying to reach." Over the next hour, we discussed implementation timelines, rollout strategies, and ongoing support needs. By the time we left the building, we had approval to move forward with Phase 2, developing all the brand implementation materials and supporting the nationwide rollout. On the flight back to Austin, Emma and I sat in comfortable silence, both of us processing what had just happened. "Do you remember our first client presentation?" Emma asked as we descended into Austin Bergstrom. I laughed, thinking back to that early meeting with the local band that needed a poster. "I was so nervous I forgot to bring business cards. And now we're rebranding national retail chains. It's wild when you think about it like that." The success of the Modern Home project led to something we hadn't expected: media attention. The rebrand was featured in several design publications, and we were invited to speak at conferences about our process and approach. Emma presented at the AIGA Design Conference in Seattle, while I spoke at a business conference in Austin about building creative agencies. But the real validation came from our peers. Other design agencies in Austin started referring overflow work to us. Design leaders from larger cities reached out asking about potential partnerships. We were invited to join professional organizations and advisory boards. "We're not just running a successful business," Emma observed one afternoon as we reviewed speaking requests and partnership opportunities. "We're becoming part of the design community leadership. With recognition came new opportunities, but also new pressures. We were approached by several companies about potential acquisitions. A large marketing agency in Chicago offered to buy us for $2.8 million. A venture capital firm wanted to invest in our growth in exchange for equity. Emma and I spent weeks discussing these options, weighing the financial benefits against the loss of independence. Ultimately, we decided to stay independent, at least for now. We were building something we believed in, and we weren't ready to give up control. Instead, we focused on organic growth. We hired 3 more team members, including a senior strategist and a business development manager. We moved into an even larger space, a renovated building in East Austin with room for 25 employees and a dedicated client presentation space. Our 4th year was our biggest yet. We crossed the $1.5 million revenue threshold, worked with clients in 12 different industries, and won several design awards for our work. Emma was recognized as one of Austin's 40 under 40 business leaders, while I was invited to join the board of the local chapter of Young Entrepreneurs Organization. But success also brought complexity. Managing a team of 18 people required different skills than managing a team of 5. We had to develop more sophisticated HR policies, financial management systems, and operational procedures. I found myself spending more time in meetings and less time on creative work, which was sometimes frustrating but necessary for our growth. The biggest challenge was maintaining our culture as we scaled. When Emma and I were the only employees, our culture was simply who we were. Now, with 18 people from different backgrounds and experiences, we had to be more intentional about defining and communicating our values. We instituted monthly all-hands meetings where we'd share company updates, celebrate team wins, and discuss challenges. We created professional development budgets for each team member and encouraged them to attend conferences and workshops. We started an annual team retreat where we'd spend a weekend away from the office, working on strategic planning and team building. Most importantly, we tried to stay true to the values that had gotten us this far, doing excellent work, treating clients and teammates with respect, and always being honest about what we could and couldn't deliver. 5 years after I'd walked out of my parents' house with 2 suitcases and a wounded pride, Harrison Rodriguez Design was featured on the cover of Austin Business Magazine as one of the city's fastest-growing creative agencies. The article described our journey from coffee shop startup to regional design leader, highlighting our client work, our team culture, and our plans for continued growth. I kept a copy of the magazine on my desk, not out of ego, but as a reminder of how far we'd come. Sometimes, when I was dealing with particularly difficult client negotiations or challenging management decisions, I'd look at that cover and remember the 24-year-old who'd been too scared to even call himself a real designer. The article also brought unexpected attention from my past. I received LinkedIn messages from college classmates who'd seen the coverage, congratulatory emails from former co-workers at the Chicago coffee shop, and even a note from my high school art teacher who said she'd always known I'd make something of myself. But the most meaningful response came from my father. He called me the evening the magazine hit newsstands, his voice warm with pride I'd never heard before. "Jake, I saw the article. Your mother and I drove to 3 different stores to find copies. We're framing it for the office." "Thanks, Dad. That means a lot. I want you to know something," he said, his voice getting serious. "That night at dinner when I said those terrible things, I was wrong about everything, but I was especially wrong about your potential. What you've built, the team you've created, the reputation you've earned, it's more than I ever accomplished at your age. Dad, you built a successful business too. You provided for our family. You were respected in the community. Jake, I want you to listen to me. What you've done is remarkable, not just the business success, but the way you've done it. With integrity, with respect for your people, with a commitment to excellence. I'm proud to be your father. I felt tears in my eyes, unexpected but not unwelcome. "Thanks, Dad. That really means everything to me." After we hung up, I sat in my office. My real office, with walls lined with awards and framed client work, with a view of the Austin skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows, and thought about the journey that had brought me here. 5 years ago, I'd been a failure by every metric that mattered to my family. No career, no independence, no direction. Today I was running $1 million business, leading a team of talented professionals, and earning recognition as a leader in my industry. But more than the external success, I'd become someone I was proud to be. Someone who could walk into any room with confidence, who could solve complex problems under pressure, who could inspire a team to do their best work. The shame my father had identified that night at dinner hadn't been permanent after all. It had just been the starting point for everything that came next. 3 years later, I was standing in front of 200 people at the Austin Convention Center, delivering the keynote address at the Texas Design Conference. The theme of my talk was "Building Something from Nothing, the Journey from Failure to Success." Emma was in the front row, along with several members of our team. In the back, I spotted my parents, who had flown down from Chicago to hear me speak. My father was recording on his phone, probably planning to show the video to anyone who would watch it. 7 years ago, I began, looking out at the audience of designers, entrepreneurs, and business leaders. I was living in my parents' basement, working at a coffee shop and wondering if I'd ever make anything of my life. My father called me the shame of our family, and honestly, he wasn't wrong. I paused, letting that sink in. But shame isn't a life sentence. It's just information about where you are right now, not where you have to stay. I told them about that night at the dinner table, about the bus ride to Austin with 2 suitcases and $2,200, about sleeping on an air mattress and eating ramen for months. I talked about the early struggles, the rejections, the moments when I'd wondered if I should just give up and go home. But I also told them about the first client who trusted me with their project, about meeting Emma and forming a partnership that changed both our lives, about the moment when we realized we weren't just freelancers anymore, we were building a real business. Today, Harrison Rodriguez Design employs 23 people and generates over $3 million in annual revenue, I said. We've worked with Fortune 500 companies, won national design awards, and been featured in publications across the country. But those metrics aren't what I'm most proud of. I clicked to the next slide, which showed a photo of our entire team at our last company retreat. I'm most proud of the culture we've built, the careers we've helped launch, and the problems we've solved for our clients. We've created a place where talented people can do meaningful work, where creativity and strategy come together to build something larger than any of us could achieve alone. The presentation lasted 45 minutes, followed by a Q&A session that went another 30 minutes. The questions ranged from tactical business advice to deeper questions about overcoming self-doubt and dealing with failure. One young designer asked, "How do you know when you're ready to start your own agency?" "You're never really ready," I replied, "but you start anyway, and you figure it out as you go. The key is being willing to learn from your mistakes and adapt quickly when things don't go as planned." Another person asked, "What would you tell your younger self if you could go back to that moment when your father called you the shame of the family?" I thought about that for a moment. I'd tell him that the shame he was feeling wasn't about who he was, it was about who he hadn't become yet, and that the only way to change that was to start building something, one day at a time, even when you don't know what the end result will look like. After the conference, my parents and I had dinner at one of Austin's best restaurants. It was surreal, sitting across from my father in the city where I'd rebuilt my life, talking about business strategies and industry trends as equals. "I want to apologize again," he said over dessert, "for what I said that night. I've thought about it every day for 7 years. Dad, we've talked about this. You don't need to keep apologizing." "Yes, I do, because what I said could have destroyed you. Instead, it motivated you to become someone I could never have imagined. That says everything about your character and nothing about my parenting." My mother reached across the table and took my hand. We're just so proud of who you've become, Jake. Not just professionally, but as a person. You're kind, you're generous, you care about your employees and your clients. You've built something meaningful. I learned from the best, I said, squeezing her hand. You taught me to treat people with respect and to never give up on something I believed in. The next morning, I took my parents on a tour of our office. I introduced them to our team, showed them the work we were doing for current clients, and explained our plans for continued growth. Emma pulled me aside while my parents were talking to some of our designers. Your dad seems different than I expected, she said. Different how? Warmer, more human. From the stories you've told, I expected someone more intimidating. I watched my father examining one of our award plaques, asking our senior designer about the project that had won it. He's changed too. We all have, I guess. That night at dinner changed all of us, just in different ways. Are you glad it happened? It was a question I'd asked myself many times over the years. I'm glad for where it led me. I'm glad I found the courage to leave, to build something of my own, to prove to myself what I was capable of. But I'm also glad we found our way back to each other. As my parents were leaving for the airport, my father pulled me aside. Jake, I want to ask you something. Would you consider opening an office in Chicago? The question caught me off guard. Chicago? Why? There are a lot of businesses there that could use what you offer. And I know some people who might be interested in working with you. It could be a way to expand into a new market. I could see what he was really asking. He wanted me to come home, not as the failed son who'd never lived up to expectations, but as the successful businessman who'd made something of himself. That's an interesting idea, Dad. Let me think about it. Of course, take your time, but know that if you ever decided to come back, you'd have a lot of support there. After they left, I sat in my office thinking about his suggestion. Opening a Chicago office would be a natural expansion for our business. We had the client base to support it, the team to staff it, and the systems to manage it. It would also be a chance to show everyone from my past, high school classmates, former co-workers, family friends, what I'd become. But it would also be coming full circle in a way I wasn't sure I was ready for. Emma knocked on my door and stuck her head in. How are you feeling after all that? Good, grateful, a little overwhelmed by how much has changed. Your parents seem really proud of you. Yeah, they are. It's nice, but also weird. For so long I was motivated by wanting to prove them wrong. Now that I have, I'm not sure what motivates me anymore. Emma came in and sat down across from my desk. Maybe that's the next phase of your journey. Figuring out what you want to build when you're not trying to prove anything to anyone else. She was right. For 7 years, I'd been driven by the need to prove that I wasn't the shame of my family, that I could build something meaningful, that I was capable of success. But now that I'd proven all of those things, what came next? That evening, I drove to the same 24-hour diner where I'd sat 7 years earlier, planning my escape from Chicago. It was still there, still open, still serving coffee to insomniacs and night shift workers. I ordered coffee and sat in the same corner booth where I'd researched cities and made plans. The waitress was different, younger, probably a college student working her way through school like I'd been doing when I left Chicago. I pulled out my phone and opened a note-taking app, just like I'd done that night 7 years ago. But this time, instead of planning an escape, I was planning what to build next. The agency was successful, but it could be more. We could expand to other cities, develop new service offerings, maybe even create our own products. We could become a model for how creative businesses should operate, how to build companies that prioritized both profit and purpose. I thought about my father's suggestion about Chicago. Maybe it was time to go back, not as someone running from failure, but as someone who had something to offer. I spent 2 hours in that diner, mapping out ideas for the next phase of our growth. By the time I left, I had the outline of a 5-year plan that would double our revenue, expand to 3 cities, and establish Harrison Rodriguez Design as one of the premier creative consultancies in the country. But more than that, I had a sense of purpose that went beyond proving anyone wrong. I wanted to build something that would outlast me, that would create opportunities for other people the way this journey had created opportunities for me. 3 weeks later, I announced our expansion plans to the team. We would be opening offices in Chicago and Denver over the next 18 months, creating satellite teams that could serve clients in those markets while maintaining our Austin headquarters. This is about more than growth, I told the team during our all-hands meeting. It's about creating a company that can have impact at scale, that can help businesses across multiple markets tell their stories effectively. Emma would lead the Denver expansion, while I would oversee the Chicago office personally. It felt like the right way to come full circle, returning to my hometown not as the person who had left in shame, but as someone who had built something worth sharing. The Chicago office opened on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 8 years after I'd walked out of my parents' house with 2 suitcases. The space was in River North, with views of the Chicago River and the downtown skyline. We'd hired local talent, partnered with established businesses, and already had a pipeline of potential clients. My father was our first visitor on opening day, bringing flowers for the reception desk and a bottle of champagne to celebrate. "I can't believe my son owns a business in Chicago," he said, looking around the office with obvious pride. "It's surreal for me too," I admitted. 8 years ago, I never thought I'd want to come back here. "Tish, are you glad you did?" I looked around the office, at the team we'd assembled, at the work hanging on the walls, at the view of the city where I'd grown up, and realized that I was. "Yeah, Dad, I am. This feels like completing a circle that started that night at dinner. I'm proud of you, son, not just for what you've accomplished, but for who you've become. You turned the worst moment of our relationship into the foundation for something remarkable." That evening, I had dinner with my family at the same restaurant where everything had started 8 years earlier. The same dining room, the same table, even the same server who remembered us from years of family celebrations. But everything else was different. My brother Marcus was there with his wife Rebecca and their 2-year-old daughter. He was still successful, still achieving every milestone on schedule, but he looked at me now with respect rather than pity. "I have to admit," he said over dessert, "I never thought you'd end up being the more successful brother." "Success looks different for everyone," I replied. "You built a career you love, married someone amazing, started a family. That's success too." My parents beamed as they listened to us talk about our respective achievements, our future plans, our families and relationships. The competitive dynamic that had defined our relationship for so long had evolved into something more mature and supportive. "I want to make a toast," my father said, raising his wine glass, "to Jake, who taught us all that sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what you're really capable of building. To starting over," I replied, raising my own glass, "and to family that loves you enough to let you find your own way." As we clinked glasses, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment, from that devastating night 8 years ago to this celebration of what we'd built together. Not just the business, but the relationships, the understanding, the mutual respect. I'd started this journey trying to prove that I wasn't the shame of my family, but somewhere along the way, I'd learned that the real victory wasn't in proving anyone wrong. It was in building something meaningful, in creating value for others, in becoming someone I was proud to be regardless of what anyone else thought. The shame my father had identified that night wasn't permanent. It was just the starting point for everything that came after, and what came after was better than any of us could have imagined. Sometimes you have to walk away from everything you know to discover who you're meant to become. Sometimes the worst thing anyone ever says to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing you ever build. Sometimes shame is just another word for potential waiting to be unlocked. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get the chance to come full circle and share what you've learned with the people who helped shape you in the first place. This is my story. From failure to success, from shame to pride, from a basement in Chicago to offices in 3 cities. But more than that, it's a story about what becomes possible when you refuse to let other people's opinions define your potential. when you're willing to start over from nothing, and when you commit to building something meaningful, regardless of how long it takes or how hard it gets. The shame of the family became the pride of the family. But more importantly, I became someone I was proud to be. And that, more than any business success or family reconciliation, is what made it all worthwhile. Family relationships can be complicated, painful, and imperfect, but they can also heal, grow, and surprise us in ways we never expected. The same people who once doubted us can become our biggest supporters when we show them who we're truly capable of becoming. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like the disappointment in your family, the one who didn't measure up, the one who took the wrong path, remember that your story isn't finished yet. Every ending can become a new beginning if you have the courage to walk away from what isn't working and start building what could be. Jake turned his father's harshest words into his greatest motivation. He transformed shame into strength, failure into success, and broken relationships into deeper understanding. His journey proves that sometimes we have to lose everything we thought we wanted to discover what we're truly meant to build. What moments in your own life forced you to start over? Have you ever had to walk away from family expectations to find your own path? Or maybe you're the parent who said something you regret, wondering if it's too late to make things right. Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if Jake's journey resonated with you, subscribe to our channel for more stories about ordinary people who found extraordinary strength in their darkest moments. Remember, it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. Sometimes shame is just another word for potential waiting to be unlocked. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.